Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about which teachers you should ask for a college application recommendation, as well as when you should ask them, what you should say, and how you should go about the entire process to be the most successful. So if you're curious about those tips, stay tuned. The first type of reference that you're going to need is an academic reference, and you're actually going to need anywhere from 2 to 4 of these. So your application should tell you how many you need. And honestly, if you're applying for colleges and later going to apply for scholarships, then you can even use these same people and they can just tweak their letter a little bit. So my recommendation would be to start with people in the core subjects. So your English, math, science, and history teachers. Now, that's not to say that you can't get someone else from a different discipline, but I would consider what type of college you're applying to and what their expectations are. Some students want to diversify their portfolio a little bit, and so they ask, should they get a humanities reference and a STEM reference? So humanities would be English or history, and STEM would be the math and sciences. And there is a benefit to this. I think if you're trying to offer a diverse outlook, then it can help, but I don't think you absolutely have to. So if you're applying to a top school, it might be better to have one of each, because let's say your strengths are in STEM. It would still be beneficial to show that you have engaged with the humanities and so forth, and perhaps that teacher could speak to different elements of your academic background and your class participation and so forth. So I think there are times when it is appropriate, but I don't think it's necessary for everyone. So if you're trying to diversify your portfolio a little bit, then I might consider asking one like English or history teacher and one science or math teacher. But if you're like really strong in, let's say, biology and math, and you want to ask both of those teachers if they can speak to your abilities, then honestly, in most cases, that's also absolutely fine. The next question that students often ask is, do I need to ask a current teacher? So you're going to be applying for colleges most likely as a senior. And so if you had a teacher as a junior that you really connected with, that would be a good option. If you've had a teacher for more than 1 year, that could also be an option, but you don't have to use a teacher just because you had him or her 2 years in a row. Now, if you're a senior and you've only had that teacher for a couple months, it might not be the best option because that teacher might not know you as well. Another thing that students sometimes ask is, well, what about like my freshman English teacher? If you have kept a relationship with that person and they can speak to your abilities, then I would say maybe. But to be honest, I typically recommend that students look at their teachers who they had in their junior year and perhaps their sophomore year. And freshman year, to be honest, like you've grown up a lot since then. And so unless there's like extenuating circumstances as to why that teacher should write your recommendation letter, usually you want it to be a bit more current than that. So when choosing an academic reference, the advice that I think trumps all the other advice that I've given is choose who knows you best. Who is going to give you that glowing recommendation? Who is going to tell the college's characteristics about you that are not present on your resume? Who's going to talk about the type of learner that you are and how you participate and how you lead and what type of presence you are in the classroom? And who's going to talk about your work in a way that makes it exciting and interesting and so forth? So who do you have that connection with? I think the answer to that is the most important thing, because that should be who you lean towards in most cases as far as who to ask, because it's usually pretty obvious when someone is writing a recommendation letter for a student that they don't really know or they don't really want to recommend, because you can only fake things so much. And so just like a good research paper or a good analytical essay has specifics in it, you want someone who's going to give the specifics about you and who's going to talk about you in a way that is not already present elsewhere in your application. So choose who knows you best, because that person is going to have a stronger narrative about you than someone who doesn't really know you that well. The next type of reference is a character reference, and I would say students need at least one, if not two of these. And you might not use both of them in the same application, but I still would try for two just in case. And so a character reference is someone who can speak to who you are as a person outside of school. So are you responsible? Can they depend on you? Are you punctual? Are you kind, compassionate, polite? All those things. So usually kids ask, let's say like a coach, if you've had a coach. Now your coach might also be a teacher, which is fine. Students sometimes will ask their priest or any other like religious official at their church, synagogue, mosque, whatever it is. And so if you're involved in like youth groups and stuff, that might be something to consider, is asking a person who knows you through that. Employers, if you have a job or if you did research or something and worked for someone, maybe you were like a babysitter or a tutor or something over the summer. It can even sometimes be a family friend, though I sort of caution students about that one because it's kind of like a weird line, but you want someone who knows you outside of school in a non-academic setting who can attest to your character. For some college applications and also scholarship applications, you might need a recommendation letter from your counselor. This is very common, so if you're not very familiar with who your counselor is, it's okay. They've probably done a million of these before. And so I would just find out which person you should ask if you don't have a relationship with any particular counselor, because I know a lot of schools have more than one, but just be prepared that this might be something that you're asked for, but it's actually pretty common. So don't be intimidated if you don't know your counselor super well. They will still help you through the process. Next big question to tackle is when to ask for a recommendation letter. Now, as a teacher, I have been given an entire summer's notice and I've been given 3 hours notice. So if you know the teacher is going to be super busy, either writing other recommendation letters or just because they're super busy in general, you want to give them probably at minimum 2 weeks and maybe a month or so. I don't think an entire summer is necessary, though I have had students ask me at the end of their junior year, and I do appreciate the notice. So that is an option, especially if you're going to be applying early decision or something and you need that recommendation letter a lot sooner, then I would try to give a bit more notice. But at the same time, usually 2 weeks is sufficient. 1 week is even, not that bad. It's just nice to be respectful of that person's time. And so you want to give them some notice. And once that person has written a letter of recommendation for you, most people save the file because they have to type it up and then they can change it later. So I have had students ask me, hey, can you print me another recommendation letter? I found this scholarship and the deadline is today. And that's not a huge deal. So if it's an initial letter and you have not asked them for one in the past, then I would say give them at least 1 to 2 weeks notice and just be very kind when you ask them and be respectful of their time and so forth. So once you've decided who you want to ask for a letter of recommendation, what do you say to the person? One key phrase that you're going to want to say is, could you write me a strong recommendation letter? You want to emphasize the word strong in there somewhere, because if they don't think they're a good fit to write your recommendation letter, it gives them a way out, because it can be really awkward if a teacher says to you, well, maybe another teacher knows you a little bit better, or maybe one of your current teachers can do a better job. Then take the hint, because you want a glowing reference. And so there is technically a difference between writing a recommendation letter and writing a strong recommendation letter. So you might consider using that phrasing. And as far as how to approach the person, do you ask in person? Do you ask via email? I think either is fine. It depends on your relationship with the person and also your access to that person. I have students who might not be able to see me except for in between classes. And so out of respect for that situation, they just send me an email and it's totally fine. And then I can reply to it at my leisure, and it's less stressful, and it's also probably less stressful on them. But at the same time, I have students who want to, ask me in person and tell me about it and give me some materials that we'll talk about later. And I don't mind that either. So I don't think that part matters, but just kind of be cognizant of the situation. Do you have the time to approach the person face to face, or is an email more appropriate? And, just regardless, always be polite. And also just as a tip from a teacher, try not to drag out the process if you do it in person, because a lot of students are really nervous and they're like, well, I was wondering, since you had me, and they're asking for a recommendation letter and you're just spit it out already. So it's okay to be firm and not abrupt, but it's okay to just come right out and say, I really value your opinion, and I'm applying to colleges pretty soon. So I was wondering if you think I could ask you for a strong recommendation letter. Is that something that you have the time for right now? Something like that. Obviously, perhaps a little bit more eloquently, but you don't need to beat around the bush. They know that you're a senior and they're going to be expecting to be asked for recommendation letters. So it's not like this big surprise or something. And also, please don't think it's a burden, because some kids are like, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you. Like, you're not a bother. It's my job. Like, it's okay. I know you're trying to be polite, but like, if you're asking a teacher for a recommendation letter, like, while it's appropriate to be courteous, like, you're not a bother. Like, it's part of their job. So just FYI. As far as what you need to give the person, there's a few things. Now, some schools have forms where they ask you to fill all of this out, and those can be super helpful. But the person is going to need to know how the recommendation letter is going to be done. Is it electronic and it's going to be received in their inbox? Is it that you need a copy of the letter in order to submit with your application? Do they need to send the letter somewhere? So they need to know to whom they should address the letter. Is it a certain college? Is it a certain committee? That kind of thing. So that kind of like address and salutation information is important. And also, it's important to give the person a concrete deadline. So when do you need this received by? When is the application due? Those kinds of things. And if they don't turn it in, like whether it's electronic or they don't give it back to you within a couple days of the deadline, if you've given them, let's say, 2 weeks notice and you haven't heard from them and it's due in 2 days, it is okay to follow up very politely. And I would also say to have somebody on deck just in case it falls through. The other thing is that you should also include a resume. Now, I would remind the person what you want them to emphasize, because you don't want them to just reiterate your resume and like take bullet points and put it into paragraphs, because that's not telling anything new about you. But you could say something like, you know, you once wrote on my personal narrative sophomore year that it was one of the best essays that you've ever read. And so I was hoping that maybe you could highlight that in my recommendation letter or something like that, you know, so kind of cue them in on like what you want them to emphasize, because some teachers, you know, they actually want to be guided as far as what you need them to say and so forth. So it is okay to kind of tell them to a certain degree, like what you would like them to emphasize and so forth. Some teachers will even ask students to read it before they submit it. Other times it's very confidential. And so just kind of keep that in mind and so forth. Like, don't be bugging them to see it and ask them what they wrote. If you're going to trust them to write the letter, then trust them to write the letter. But at the same time, I have had a couple students where I'm like, okay, I know this is a big deal, so please make sure I'm emphasizing what you need me to emphasize. So just kind of like, don't be surprised if they don't tell you anything about it, but don't be surprised if they ask for more information or clarification. They're just trying to do a good job for you. So let's just go ahead and conclude with some other tips that will help you throughout this process. The first thing that you need to know as far as extra information is that you're probably going to be asked at some point to waive your right to view the recommendation. And this is totally normal, so don't be intimidated. It doesn't mean they said something bad about you. Just click it. It's a sign of trust. Move on. Other things, if you're asking someone outside of school for, let's say, like a character reference, especially if it needs to be mailed in, you should give them an envelope with a stamp already provided. If you're asking a teacher, usually schools will pay for the stamps, and usually they have school stationery and school envelopes. So I think the envelope and stamp thing is more applicable to somebody who doesn't work for your school. And it's just a sign of like just politeness and ease, because honestly, stamps are not super expensive, but they're kind of like annoying if you don't have them. And so you don't want to make the person go to the post office or the store or something to buy a stamp. So give them that as like just a courtesy. Make sure that your references are aware of deadlines, like I said, and politely follow up if you have concerns. I think a thank you is appropriate, but I don't think you need to buy the person like a gift or anything, but just something like, especially if it's electronic and you just get a notification that so-and-so has submitted your reference, just say like, hey, I just received an email saying that you submitted my reference. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And if you're going to be asking the person for multiple references, you can, I think, wait till the end and do that. But it's also really nice to just like get a thank you, because it just kind of shows that you, even though you know it's something that the person was willing to do for you, you're not taking it for granted. So even if you are just saying a quick thank you in the hallway to somebody, it still means a lot. And if you get the scholarship or if you get into that school, tell the person who recommended you, because they actually do care. It is nice to know when this stuff has worked out well for the student. So just kind of keep those things in mind as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know the college application process can be really intimidating, and honestly, some students have never had to ask anyone for a letter of recommendation before the college application process, so it can be a bit nerve-wracking, but your teachers want you to be successful, and so we want to tell colleges and scholarship committees all the good things about you. So hopefully that eases some of the stress a little bit, and hopefully these tips were helpful to you as you embark on that stage of the college application process. If this video was helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe, turn the notification bell on, because I'll be doing other test prep and college application videos. And please don't hesitate to leave me a comment below with your tips for the recommendation process in case there's anything I forgot that could help somebody as they're going through this. So thank you guys so much, and until next time, happy writing.